Welcome to Arguing Agile. If you get tired of looking at us on YouTube, we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and about 1,000 other podcast platforms.
Why people wouldn't be looking at me, I don't know, but that's their choice.
I've been looking to insert the content of a particular Agile coach that I follow on LinkedIn, Vibhor Chandel. Chandel?
Yeah, Chandel, I think.
I probably should have found that out before we started recording.
There's only one Vibhor. So
There's only one Vibhor. I follow him on LinkedIn. I really like his content. I really like what he's trying to do. This podcast, I wanted to highlight a post that he put up a couple months ago that flagged my interest because it was a kind of a simplified sprint review. And I thought that was really cool because there's not a lot of people out there putting out sort of tactical how-tos. And I definitely appreciate it because the typical way that I go into a sprint review is with a simple 3-point outline, which is what, so what, then what type of outline, right? If we go with the what, so what, then what method, normally what I try to do in my sprint reviews is I try to say, this is what the goal was and what the stories that contribute to the goal were, and then the so what would be the demo, and then the back and forth discussion from the demo.
Yeah.
And then the then what is the peek into the backlog of what's next after these, and also the syncing with kind of what we heard with feedback, because you always get feedback out of sprint reviews. That's kind of the goal. So taking that into consideration, taking what you got in the future, your high-level roadmap items into consideration, and kind of talking about what's next. It's a real lo-fi version of a sprint review that I use, but I do it on purpose, and I tell customers and whoever that is in the room, development team, customers, executives, managers, doesn't really matter who's in the room. I tell them, like, we're going with a super lo-fi approach because if you don't understand something, I want you to stop and ask about what you don't understand, and then we'll clarify it and we'll bake in to the structure going forward the things that make it more clear to you. And I've never really had a problem with that approach, believe it or not.
Yeah, I believe that. I think there's a lot of dogma around sprint reviews out there. People go in and say, this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
And they follow kind of almost like a script. But yeah, to your point, the biggest thing out of all of that is, what's the purpose? Like, why do it? Right. Why do a sprint review? Sprint's already over. You can't influence what happened in the sprint anymore. It's finished.
Yeah.
So you might say, well, what didn't go so well? That's a retro.
Yeah.
So why do a sprint review? My take on it is leadership basically gave you, the team, 2 weeks worth of funding and said, go do something valuable. Product owners came out and said, this is what we believe is the most valuable stuff that the team should be focused on the next 2 weeks. So once that time period elapsed, how do they know they've got their money's worth? That, to me, is the reason why you have a sprint review. You show them what's been developed and say, this is what we've done. It's 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And do you have feedback for us, right? In this session, get the feedback, improve, change things up, listen to people on an ongoing basis. There's a reason why we're doing this every 2 weeks instead of, every 2 months or a quarterly phase gate type of activity where you learn about it and you go, now it's a change request. You need to pony up a lot more money. So long story short, sprint reviews, they should not be shortchanged. They're a mandatory event, and we can get into the kind of structure of it a little bit further into the podcast.
Yeah. For me, the why of the sprint review, and also this kind of goes into the reason not to shortchange length of the sprint review, is you want to elicit feedback from the customers that the feature was designed for. I'm trying to package this so it can be usable. A line I walk on the podcast is packaging what we're talking about so it's not so conceptual and it's actually usable. That's why I like what we're about to present so much, because it's very tactical, it's very tactile. You can put your hands on it, touch it, write stickies for each of the things that we're about to talk about, and make it your agenda for your sprint reviews to have more effective sprint reviews. The podcast, one of the podcasts we just went up with was more effective Scrum overall. Now we're digging in to a lower level. Maybe we're starting a theme here.
Yeah.
So again, my main goal out of the sprint review is I want to get interaction with the customers, the users of the product. I want to hear from them. I want to demo a feature, and then I want to stop talking and be quiet and listen critically to all of their feedback. And I feel, if there's one place and one session in my entire life where I can listen critically to people and really take in what they're saying, it's at the sprint review.
Yeah, you hit two things there. One is get the right audience in, right? So I think we're kind of getting to the next level. Sprint review, we've agreed, can't be shortchanged, has to happen, kind of the why we touched on.
Right.
Now, who should be there? And how should it be facilitated? That's the other thing. Again, there's a lot of dogma out there around this. People say, well, the sprint review, the Scrum Master facilitates that.
Yeah.
I think a sprint review shouldn't be labeled into a structure where people just follow it as like rote. Mm-hmm. Because then what's going to happen is when the conversation goes on and on and on a little bit, the conversation being feedback from the users,
right.
You don't want somebody to say, hey, time out, right? We're coming up to the top of our hour. So what? You're getting feedback.
Right.
Is it valuable?
Yeah,
right?
well,
let it go.
Yeah, I have done this on many teams. Like, whoa, we're running short on our time box. Should I step in as a facilitator? And my real thinking is like, I don't know, is the time box too short for the session? I mean, should the time box be in some way, shape, or form connected to the flow metric to say if we're demoing 5 stories, we need 5 minutes per story, and therefore we should have some kind of floor of the event. Whereas if we're demoing 10 stories and it's 5 minutes per story, now we're not going to get through the session in less than an hour. But for the purposes of all of the speculation here, who should facilitate? I guess we're doing this one first. Who should facilitate? This is one of those topics I could go. Number one, who should facilitate? I feel the product owner should be facilitating the session. The product owner is the one who sets the stage. The product owner is the one who invites the users. The product owner is the one who is going to be talking through and introducing each feature as it's brought up. So I kind of feel the product owner should be the facilitator of this meeting, but this is my yes and or yes but or scrum but or whatever you want to call it. There's a but in here is what I'm trying to say. The scrum master on the team should be 100% capable of doing everything that the product owner does during this session. I will throw that glove down.
Boom. Okay, so first of all, who should facilitate? Again, there's a lot of, as I mentioned, keep saying, right? There's a lot of thoughts out there that this person should own this.
It also changes where the agenda we're about to lay out, who facilitates in each piece does change depending on what part of the meeting we're in. So there's that to say as well.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. So we're not calling this the sprint demo.
Right.
We're calling it the sprint review. To me, a sprint review basically just simply has somebody say, here's how the sprint went. And you're not justifying anything. Mm-hmm. You're not making excuses. Mm-hmm. You're not debating anything. You're simply saying, this sprint, the goal was, and then the goal is outlined very briefly. The team took up this sprint with this goal, and we met the goal more or less, right? Just say how you met it. 100%. We met all of the goal.
Yeah.
We met the goal except AB, ABC, whatever it is. And then the last thing underlying that would be just a single line that just says why.
Yeah.
So we had 3 team members out for 4 days each because of whatever it is.
Yeah.
People understand that, right? Now, who should be delivering that message? It typically falls on the Scrum Master to do that.
Sure.
But I'm going to rewind back to what you were saying. The product owner owns this event. It's the product owner who says to the stakeholders, here's what the team has delivered as a sliver of functionality in this 2-week period or whatever the sprint length is. Mm-hmm. So I'm perfectly okay if they want to deliver that message and say, I set this goal for the sprint, and here's how the team met that, and then they ran into tailwinds or whatever it was. Just say that, and that's it. So again, it doesn't have to be the Scrum Master. It doesn't have to be the product owner. If they want to divide, that's fine. The Scrum Master comes in and says a little bit about the sprint, and then hands it over to the product owner. That's fine. I've even encouraged developers who want to come out and be okay with facilitation to come out and say that. Just say, these are the goals we started out with. Here's that. And I'm going to hand over, or I'm going to do the demo, or hand over to Fred or Mary or whatever.
I think you're onto something 100% because I am, we talked about this I can't remember how many podcasts ago, less than 4 podcasts ago, about the team taking ownership for different things. I remember we were talking about the team taking ownership for writing the stories. I believe it is ultimately the product person's responsibility to feel, and this is, I could be wrong on this, so feel free to challenge me on this one. And also in the comments as well, feel free to challenge me on this one. But I believe that it could be the whole team's responsibility to make sure the experience goes well and to make sure that each segment of this agenda kind of moves along and that they do their best to interact with the customer or whatever. However, if I'm going to put the accountability on one person, it's going to be on the product owner. Hey, did the message get out to the customers? I'm going to go to the product owner to ask that. I'm not going to approach a group of people and just address the group and ask that. I'm going to go to that one person. But again, like we get back to the division of like product owner, team, or whatever. That kind of is the product owner's role to be accountable back to the business for all the stuff that the team's working on and tying it back to the product and all that kind of stuff.
I fully agree. I think it's the product owner who actually sets the goal to begin with anyway. So it behooves them to say, here's the goal I set. If they want to insert the why, they can do that. And then they can say, this is how the team performed against that goal. And again, at the end of that, they could say what happened, right? Dependencies weren't met, whatever it was. That's good. But yeah, ultimately, they should be talking to those things. Around that, if anybody wants to say, well, the team took on 72 story points and we did 68, I tell people just say, what's the value of that? Yeah.
We'll talk about that inside of the agenda because I don't know how valuable that kind of discussion is or not, but we'll talk about that when we get it. So let's get into the agenda, the actual agenda.
Sure.
Okay, so giving credit where credit's due here. On Vibhor's page, he puts up the sprint review simplified. We'll walk through his whole agenda from top to bottom and go point by point, okay?
Sure.
I guess before we start, we should say we really like the tactical nature of the template for you to use and adjust where you need it as possible. So it's a good first pass. We're going to challenge a few things. We're going to agree with a few things. So here we go. The first section is the introduction of people participating in the sprint. Right? So the names, roles, location, if distributed, of people participating in the sprint. So I'm thinking, obviously, the first thing you're going to say is like, hey, welcome to the sprint review. Maybe you're not going to go around the whole room and talk to every developer on your team. The less developers you have in your team, the easier this is to go through. But when we looked at this agenda before we started, one of the things we agreed on was you probably don't need to go around the whole Scrum team and basically reiterate what everyone already knows, who everyone is and what their roles are. However, whoever you've added to the meeting as far as customers go or people from the business or subject matter experts or people from other departments, you might want to either intro them or have them intro themselves. For example, if it's the first sprint that you're delivering stuff to customers, like new customers, and they don't know your team members, maybe you should do this.
I agree. Yeah, so you don't have to do it every sprint, but first sprint, just to get to know people that in both ways, not just the developers, but to your point, business stakeholders, anybody who's showed up and people just see a face and a name. So I like to call on them to just say, introduce yourselves if this is your first time. Yeah. And just briefly state your name, your role, and what you hope to, contribute on the team. That's it.
I could also see skipping over this if your customers are not new to your team. I can see skipping over this, but then if you have some maybe some business people or like I think of like salespeople that don't necessarily know each individual member of the development team in larger organizations. When people go to demo, I think the person facilitating the thing is like, hey, now we're going to hand off to Om. He's our senior Java developer on our development team. He's going to show you XYZ story. And I would intro you before I pass it over to you. Right. And then as people speak and stuff like that, they would need to remind themselves to intro the next person they hand off to, or maybe the facilitator would have to remind or break in, be like, hey, I'm going to hand it off to Bob now. And then the facilitator would break in and be like, oh, by the way, Bob is our developer, whatever. I mean, it would be nice if the team could get that presentation cadence to presenting to people outside the team to, hey, introduce yourself. What's your role in the team? Hey, I'm Bob. I'm a developer. I'm Brian. I'm a developer. I'm going to show you feature XYZ that I worked on. And that's all it takes. It's like 3 seconds.
Yeah, it shouldn't take long. I agree.
I don't know. Location?
I think in today's world, it might be just worth another second to say this person is located offshore or whatever. The other way you could go with that is in your collaboration tool, they can just rename themselves and say Bob You put a vertical bar in Pasadena or Mary, Belgium, or whatever.
Yeah.
That way people know, so you don't have to bother.
Yeah.
It's just useful to because sometimes you say, well, yeah, this is good. I need to reach out to this person. It's just nice to know if they're in your time zone or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I can go either way on that one too. You could skip it, right? It doesn't have to be done. Depends on how much time you have.
All right, the next thing on the agenda here is you've gone through the introduction, you've given the names, roles, location, if appropriate, or you've rolled it into your discussion as you start. Then you're going to talk about the sprint goal. So in his agenda, it's the sprint goal. What was the sprint goal? Was it a success, partial success, failure, whatnot? You'll talk about whether the sprint goal was achieved or not, and you'll talk about any changes that were made to the goal after the sprint started. I also, other teams that I've been on, this is the part of the sprint review where they also bring up metrics. They'll be like, hey, the team performed like this. I know he has that in his next section, which I think the metrics sort of are in his next section.
Yeah, they're
outcomes.
in the output, I think.
No, I think they're in outcomes.
Outcome, but it's in the output. At the bottom of outcome. See it, number 4?
Oh, I see, output. Yeah,
I think that's what he means to say.
Okay. So let's push that to the next category. But we're talking about the goal right now. So we had a podcast on sprint goals, right? And it was basically, I think the very first thing you said in the podcast that we had on sprint goals was, what's the barometer for knowing if you passed or failed? You would know it here because you say, hey, our sprint goal was to introduce whatever. And we did it, we're about to show it, or we didn't, and we're going to show you what we did and said, or whatever. This is the time to deal with that. And in the vein of, there's a philosophy of like breaking the bad news first kind of deal.
Yeah.
That's this.
I think you're right. I think that only works if you're not doing it repeatedly. Otherwise, it becomes an expectation, right?
Right, yeah.
But the sprint goals, so I just want to say 2 things about that to kind of lean in with. One is, who does this delivery? Like, who MCs this portion of it?
I think this is all product owner.
I agree. It is all product owner because they set the sprint goal.
Right.
So that's fine. But in Vibhor's listing, this is a pretty good listing. I might add a 0 here before the 1, which is why? Why did we even do this in the sprint?
Yeah.
As a product owner, I could say, well, we're doing this because, and then what are we doing? And then how do we do, right? So I might structure it that way if I was...
Let me line back up to it. So he lines it out to say sprint goal, and then the subcategories are, number 1, what was it? Number 2, what was the outcome of the sprint goal?
Right.
And number 3 is any changes that we had to make. So assuming that you didn't have to make any changes, which I would hope that the majority of teams do not start their sprint and then have to trash the sprint goal and come up with some kind of compromise. So that brings us back to reiterating the sprint goal, and then number 2, talking about whether it was successful or not. And when you're talking about whether it's successful or not, you're basically outlining your demo agenda by talking about this. And then some of that moves to the next category, the outcome category. But basically, if I was starting, I would say, hey, the sprint goal, our goal was to reduce business risk by getting out of this old unmaintainable database and migrating all the data over here to this new solution, whatever the solution is. The sprint goal could either be we encountered some challenges and we partially migrated, but we're not fully migrated yet, or we tested the solution during the sprint and we found that we can't migrate to what we wanted to migrate to, and we had to roll everything back, and here's what we learned. That could be the agenda, basically. We had to change sprint goal. But I'm going on a long-winded way of explaining because I kind of think what you said is wrapped up in point 1. What was the sprint goal? Because if I'm the product person and I'm going to appropriately describe the sprint goal to an audience that is developers, business people that weren't involved in the sprint, people way up high at the business level who don't understand. I have to start with our goal of the sprint was, and then just state the goal. And the reason we're doing that is because, and then XYZ. So like for me, in the example I'm talking about, our goal this sprint was to migrate out of whatever old database over to new XYZ technology. Okay, that's a great goal. Who cares? Like that doesn't give you the why to anybody that's on the call. I guess I'm purposefully giving a bad example, because in that example, if we migrate the data and move it over here and then swap the application to the point of the new data source, the user sees absolutely nothing. I'm probably being a bit more pedantic about this because I'm picking a bad example as far as feature development goes, because now I can say, because I'm reducing business risk of this old database, this old unsupported platform. I was on a project one time where we migrated the development framework. The company was on PHP, an older version of PHP, and then we migrated to 7. And luckily, I had already gone through a migration. Like years ago, I had gone through the exact same migration at another company. And so I already had experience of everything that they were going to run into. I was like, anything you have that touches and interacts with databases, you have to refactor that. Any of your logging stuff, you have to refactor that. I already knew generally, but I wasn't there as a developer. I was there as a product person.
Right.
So I basically could say, like, I basically knew how to pitch the why back to the business. I was like, I have to take your risk that you're assuming now way down to a lower level. I basically have to reduce your risk, your business risk. That's just one example. Cleaner examples might be, I'm introducing a new API when your customers were, I don't know, sent data extracts.
Right.
And now I just got rid of all that heavyweight data processing and stuff from your platform because your customers just pull what they need. And here it is. Congratulations.
Yeah, I think you make fair points. I think the thing to do, though, there would be to say the why, like not I'm doing this, because I've heard the what's so far, right?
You're going to say that because that's the goal. I'm doing this is the goal.
For sure, but the why is important,
why,
right? So I'm doing this, like customers are pointing out a different data source. That's the what, but the why, right? What does that mean? Why are they having to do that?
Right.
Why do we want them to do that?
Right.
That's it. So in your example, you said, well, we're minimizing the risk, etc. That would be the way I would probably prefer to open. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't tell a product owner how to do that, but it would be good if they just said, this is why we're doing this. This is what we wanted to do. Here's how we did against that goal.
Theoretically, you should have all this in your stories. It should all be in your stories, and I would also argue it should all be in your epics, quite honestly. But we didn't even talk about how you build a list of attendees in the first place. It's like, if you're using personas in your stories, you should be able to look through all your stories, find all the personas that are listed as a customer service agent, as a field technician, as a whatever. Okay, well, these 2 people have 3 or 4 different stories in the sprint. I'm going to invite a couple customer service people, couple field technicians, and then we'll start demoing. And then when you're telling them, hey, this sprint was all about reducing risk as a business overall because we were on this old technology, we could get hacked, we could do whatever, we have dependencies, it's real hard to change, blah, 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 blah. This sprint was about changing, refactoring. All the technology that we're about to demo to you is working on the new stuff, new stack. We're going to demo it for you. We're going to talk through it, and then they'll ask questions. They'll see the product. They'll see what they're about to be working with, assuming that they don't have the ability to directly touch it during the demo. There's 2 different types of demos, in my opinion. There's one where the users actually are putting their hands on it, and you're following them. And then the other type of demo is we're pulling it up on our machine and they're just asking questions. So those are different demos.
Indeed they are, and one's more effective than the other, clearly.
One is far more effective.
Yeah. And so I'd prefer for the users to get their hands on it.
Right.
And you sometimes have to put some guardrails around that because some users will just go a little bit to the extreme and go, it should do this. We think it doesn't do this. Well, it wasn't meant to do that.
Right.
But that's where the facilitation comes in.
Yeah.
But I agree with that. I think that's probably the best way to run a session. But to your point about the attendees, right? You absolutely have to have those people that are the personas.
Right.
You also want to not exclude anybody because this is for everyone to come in and see what's going on, even if they're not directly impacted. Most of the folks there will be indirectly impacted. Not all, most. And then leadership will be there, leadership from any side. It's good for them to see the progress being made, the challenges that the team is facing. It's good for them to see that. Yeah. So I basically include everybody.
Selfishly, before we move on to a real point, what do you think about recording your sprint demos? What do you think about that?
I often see people recording the demos, and I also, at the same time, when they're doing that, I see people not showing up to them, saying, well, just watch the recording.
Yeah, watch the recording.
It's like, okay, you could do that. Sure. However, the whole point of it is to have the interaction, ask questions, provide feedback, obtain feedback. How do you do that on a recording? So it becomes very difficult. So I do not record these things. I ask people to show up. And if they can't show up, I ask them to second somebody to show up in their area who knows about it. So that's my take on it is don't bother because the cloud is full of bits and bytes that everybody's paying for. that
Yeah.
aren't necessarily being effective.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem recording the sessions. The problem I have is the asynchronous feedback.
Yeah.
Once I record the sessions, it's like, oh, I saw it work this way or whatever, but maybe you can add this bow. Maybe this would be a good idea. Maybe you can move this here. Maybe you should have brought that up while the customer was in the room so we can kind of vet that and talk about whether the customer thinks that's a good idea or not. Oh,
Yeah.
no, we don't need to bother the customer. I know they would go
know
along with
best.
it. I know they would like that.
Yeah.
That's what so
Red flags go up everywhere.
I
when
know,
you
yeah.
see-
Again, this is a continuing thing that I do on the podcast. I'm speaking to the lowest common management denominator that I'm trying to, yeah, I know.
He agrees.
Yeah, I'm trying to move past that very quickly. But that's reality, man.
It is.
Yeah, maybe it's just somebody trying to get familiarity with the types of questions customers ask, if they really, really, really couldn't come to the meeting. Although I do have to say, like, if you can't come to the meeting, what else are you doing at your time? Like, what else is going on, man?
Why is this not important to you?
It only happens once every other week for a finite amount of time, and it's well moderated, and it has an agenda, and the agenda is the same basically every time. Whatever is conflicting, you really should push that.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like you said, send somebody who really understands what types of things they should be asking, and then you'll have a voice. Like, you don't have a voice in prioritization if you don't show up to that
That's right.
section.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly.
I don't know if I can keep any of this in because we're really off topic now, but
We're not too far off topic.
No, we're not
talking
too-
about people who should be attending, must
Yeah.
attend.
that's kind of left out of here. It's kind of assumed in his agenda, and I understand it.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of would put that under like an item 0 before his introduction of people is like, based off of the features you're about to deliver, look through the stories, figure out who the users are, invite reps of the users, and again, I kind of put this on the product person to be responsible for, but it should be straightforward to know who you should be inviting, because if you're writing good stories, it should be named in the stories. All right, let's move to his next section, because I know we're going to want to talk about some of the stuff in the next section, which is outcome. The outcomes of the sprint, the strategy used, the efforts applied, discoveries made, and the output are his categories.
Strategy is used. So here, this is fairly high level. I mean, the development team has come up with a product increment. So strategies used might be something like, well, we didn't have access to the full data set, so we mocked up the data. That's a strategy.
Oh, I see.
Right? To me, that's how I read this. Things like getting validation. So say you're building a product that has multiple teams working on it. So to get validation on your part of the product, you reached out to another team that is also working on a product increment of theirs. That's a strategy. That's how you work together on it, as opposed to building something in silo.
Yeah.
And then time shifted T plus whatever, they get it, and then they look at it, and it doesn't quite meet what they're looking for. Those are the sorts of things. I don't know what else you'd put under strategy used, really.
This is probably the category that I'm going to push back on the most, because I don't 100% understand. Because I'm going to go and outline the sprint goal, and we're going to talk about whether it was a success or not, or if it was some partial success or whatever. We'll have a discussion out of that. I want to cut straight from talking about the sprint goal straight into the review. That personally, I want to go straight into the review. I want to get the users into the product as fast as possible.
But sometimes people care about how the team is doing, and that's probably what he's, I think, implying here.
Now,
efforts applied, right?
So he has an item in here about discoveries made.
Yeah.
That item, I think, could come out of being buried in number 3 and move down into the demo area. But if I take discoveries made out of this section, I think it makes a bit more difference. I still don't understand strategy used for, but if we're talking about effort applied and output, let's talk about those two for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can align with what you're saying, because when I was part of a larger program, we would have a larger program operating on Scrum at scale. I mean, sort of pseudo Scrum at scale, arguably safe. I don't really know what it really was. I don't think the program really knew what it really was. But they would have a very short section at the beginning of the call to talk about how the teams were doing, team metrics. and they would look at team metrics, and they'd look at the overall program, like team metrics rolled up to the program, even though you can't really do that. They sort of did it because they were safe. They would look at team metrics from team to team. They were flattened. I think, to the program's credit, I think they stripped the axis off of the graphs just to show whether teams were moving up or down or whatever. And there may be questions about, like, well, why is this team moving down for 2, 3, 4 sprints in a row? And that would be, we had some turnover on that team, or half the team got merged with another team, or whatever it is. I'm a fan of doing a high level, this is what's going on with this team, inside of the sprint review when it's just for the team. I don't know about exposing that when users in the room and managers in the room. If I had a sprint review and it was 10:30 a.m. until noon, and then from 10:30 to 10:45, the first 15 minutes of the meeting is just the team, and then from 10:45 to the rest of the meeting, that's when the actual invite goes to everybody else. But the first 15 minutes is this type of stuff. Hey, this was our sprint goal. The problem is you have to reiterate some of this stuff, but exactly. this is our sprint goal, or maybe you start with the metrics. This is our 3 sprint burn down. This is the business value we delivered. This is the velocity we delivered. This is what we look like over the last 3 sprints of delivering or whatever. Maybe there's some percentages of, and again, like I know I'm jumping podcasts ahead, but maybe there's a percentage of establishing feature development versus basically technical architecture and keeping your stuff up to date and stuff like that. Maybe there's that, showing the percentage mixes to say we were 90% feature development for the last 2 sprints, but this sprint, since we were kind of pushing all this infrastructure stuff off, we had to drop down to 60% feature development. Like, none of this is valuable to customers, but I would also argue other managers in the organizations, I don't know if I would want to communicate those numbers. This is the real velocity number of my team. The velocity dipped, the velocity spiked, the velocity has been down for 2-3 sprints. I don't know if I want to expose those stats to anyone who is not sitting on the team.
I fully concur with that, because the only thing that will happen if you did share those numbers with people is they'll get weaponized. People will just be asking you to increase those numbers, right? So I agree. I completely agree with that. But going back to this division of time, the first 15 minutes, etc. I'm just thinking through this. What was the goal? You'd have to repeat that when everybody joined anyway. I think
it'd be better to move the whole introspective part either to the very end after you kick all the customers off the call, or roll it into your retrospective and separate it out of this. That's probably the cleaner way to do it. I'm just trying to think of a way where you are using that information that you're gathering to make the team aware of it, and maybe this is not the venue for that.
It can be. It doesn't have to be. So I think with this event, if you start the event, then at T+5, if you haven't moved to the point where somebody is showing something, right, then you're actually just dragging it out.
I think you're right with that one. I want to move past this stuff.
Yes. Yes. So again, that 5 is not, it's not prescriptive that you must spend 5 minutes. Right. Sometimes, and the product owner does their bit, and then you just say, okay, let us show you. Quickly get into the showing part.
I don't know, the part where he has discoveries made. I think of discoveries as product discovery. I think of it as things that are confirming or denying our assumptions based on things that we're about to build or that we've built and then measured, or things that we have not yet built that we've run an experiment and now we have an idea about. It makes sense because the product people and the team should be involved in discovery in some way, shape, or form. The team should be involved in discovery, and you're going to be doing some discovery work, but it's probably not discovery work that is in line with the things that the team is working on. You're probably working way ahead. So I don't know how to crowbar this stuff into the sprint review.
I think, well, first of all, I don't think every sprint you're going to have discoveries made.
Yeah.
So for me, you're right, product, absolutely, right? The other thing is the team could actually stumble across something new that they've learned in the sprint. There's plenty of examples on that. Like, we're using this tool, we found that it's inadequate. We have to go with another tool. That's a discovery. Yeah. Now, is that worth sharing? Only if it has impact.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it has no meaning to anybody. So use another tool, who cares?
Yeah.
But if it has impact, like because of that, it means that we'll be able to deliver less in the next sprint or whatever the impact is. At that point, you could share that and say that was a discovery made. We learned something.
I also could see discoveries made. We're going back to my terrible example of we're going to try to migrate all this stuff from one database to a different one or whatever. If the discovery made in this one was, well, when we got into the database, we realized that it wasn't one database. It was actually 3 databases, right. And these tables stored whatever, and these other tables we had to look at to get the history, or it wasn't one table that stored everything. It was distributed, these other tables, and we didn't have access or whatever. Like that kind of thing is what I think of as a discovery, an unintended hurdle that the team had to deal with once they got into it. If that's what we're talking about here, I don't know how deep I would get into that in a sprint review. Again, I kind of am going back to get me to the demo.
Unplanned things, agreed. But in those sorts of examples, you definitely don't want to go deep.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to talk about how now the team's having to do cross-table joins. That means nothing, right? Just say, it just means that our work got more complicated.
Right.
That's it. Keep it really simple and then move past that.
Yeah.
Move past it to the point that, as you were saying, to show the product, show what you've done.
All right. His next 2 categories, average supplies and output, I don't understand unless we're talking about in terms of things that are specific to the Scrum team. And then I suggest moving them out of here. And then strategy use, I don't understand.
I think effort supplied and output go hand in hand, and they would be like, we had X capacity, et cetera, et cetera. Again, these aren't necessarily things you want to dwell on. The output typically revolves around what you delivered, number of story count, story point count, whatever it is. Again, not a huge value add right there.
Yeah.
There might be appetite though, because that's what people are used to seeing in these events. So if there is, fine, but whoever's presenting this should just show it. Here it is, and then move on.
Yeah.
We're not getting into discussions. Oh yeah, the team took on 72 points and only delivered 60. Why was that? No, if there's major things there that you can actually point to, fine. For example, it was a July 4th holiday weekend, right? We had 3 people out because of illness, something like that. Note it quickly and move on, right? Don't even dwell on it, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're wasting time. You need to get to that demo.
What do you think the next section should be? Should it be giving credit to people, or should giving credit to people either come first or should it come last?
I have a preference, but not an express preference.
Oh, not a strong one? Yeah.
I like to start with the stuff we talked about and get to the demo quick, because and then leave the credits to the end. The reason being, oftentimes stakeholders drop from the calls.
Yeah.
So if you go on and on and on, they haven't seen anything yet, right? They may drop.
So as we move along, our agenda is becoming a quick intro. If you're not demoing to a lot of different people on a regular basis, if it's sort of the same team, kind of stays together, you will quickly move over the team and really only demo the new faces, new customers, new business people. Before you move on, you'll go over the sprint goal, and then you'll quickly review the sprint goal, talk about whether it was successful or not, and if you had to make changes. We kind of skipped over that. It makes total sense to me that if there was a change to the sprint goal, you would highlight, like, hey, we started, this is a sprint goal, we had to change it, this is a reason, everyone's on the same page. Everyone who's at the demo anyway is probably going to be more interested in the new sprint goal anyway.
Right.
So, yeah. And then outcome, again, not 100% certain about this category staying where it is. Credits, we're going to come back to that one. Okay, so let's cut to the category I want to get to. Demo and feedback. Vibhor has them listed as 2 categories. I don't think they're 2 categories. I think this is 1 category, but it's 1 category per item that you're presenting. I think for every individual feature you're going to be demoing, feature, story, whatever, you're going to be demoing, you have to repeat this agenda. And the agenda is, number 1, give a high-level overview of the work that was done. Number 2, demo the work, pull up the screens, walk through it, whatever it is. Number 3, ask the user, what do you think about it? Number 4, be quiet and listen to the user's feedback.
Amen.
That is my 4-step process.
Yeah, it really is that simple. But oftentimes what you see is, you see one of 2 things. The person who is doing the demo feels personally challenged when there's feedback.
Yeah.
I see that all the time. So It's not you. You're
Right.
just the fingers on the keyboard.
Right, yeah.
The whole team is behind you. So when they feel personally challenged, that then is on the facilitator to kind of make sure that doesn't happen. The other thing I see is the anchor in the room, somebody who has a vocal kind of attitude, and they're going to get into this combative stance with the user. Now you understand. We have to do it that way because. So to your point about shut up and listen, right? Listen and really try and understand, empathize with the user, try to understand what they're trying to say and why, right? And don't assert yourself and say it has to be done that way because trust me, I'm the technical person, I'm telling you. Figure out, and then you can always negotiate with them, right? But yeah, so yes, listen.
Yeah, I've been in quite a few reviews where this is combat. Like this is proving, especially if the user, like the worst feedback you can get from a user is like, yeah, it's pretty good.
Right.
And then nothing. Like that's the worst feedback.
Well, that's again down to the facilitator. That's where the facilitator will come in and say, so what's the one thing you don't like about it?
Right.
What is the one thing you really like about it, right? Just get them to participate more.
Or the thing I do with project managers all the time, I'm like, you can't just let silence be your tool.
No.
In a facilitation, just be like, yeah, it's okay. And then don't like let them expand on, yeah, it's okay. Or prompt them with a question and then leave it open. Like, it's just okay. What else were you expecting out of this tool? What else were you expecting out of the demo? Or what do you think you would improve? Exactly like you just said. What would you do if you could do this differently? I don't know. There's a million ways you could phrase that question, but like none of them stick if you're going to keep talking over. Yeah. Oh, maybe you. You want to do that? Okay. Well, maybe if we do that, then this would happen, and maybe you might want to.
Exactly. Yes. Stop. Listen. I want to talk about that second point under feedback, though.
Record
feedback.
Yeah.
How do most teams record the feedback? Right. That's something that I'd like the listeners to kind of think through. Like in your reviews, how do you record the feedback?
Yeah. Good.
Right?
Good
Who does
question.
that? Like,
good question.
Do you make notes?
Well,
you can do that. That's fine.
I'll tell you how I've seen it done. How I've seen it done is everybody in the room takes separate notes, and then they never compare the notes. And then they go with whatever the highest paid person in the room says that the customer said, and then that becomes it takes a little longer to do this way, but this is a way that I have done it in the past. When you're about to demo something, you pull up the story. Here's Brian's story of the most effective team I was ever on. When the team is about to demo something, they will first pull up the actual story that the development team worked off of. They'll pull it up on the screen. They'll present it. It'll say clearly who the user is and the reason. They'll say, okay, hey, we did story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 was as a user, you wanted to do XYZ functionality because you really needed to do it faster than whatever because it was too slow. And then in order to, the acceptance criteria in the story was, number 1, we'd pull up the page. Number 2, we'd load whatever with a big load of data or whatever it was. And number 3, it would return in half the time or whatever milliseconds where normally the page would return with this many milliseconds. So now I'm going to show you that the page loads in half the time based on a refactor or whatever from the new database or whatever it was, right? Again, I should have picked a much better example for all my examples in this podcast, but hey, whatever. It's too late. MVP examples. But I would show the acceptance criteria and be like, we're going to walk you through number 1, then we're going to walk you through number 2, then we're going to walk you, number 1, the page loads in half the time. Number 2, when you select what you want, you don't have to wait while you add things to the list. And number 3, when you save them, the page saves and responds and it shows you that it's saved in less time than before, which was X number of seconds that you were waiting because there was a big lag because we were going to this old database. I would be like, this is the plan that we're going to show you in the demo, and then the developer would basically be following the acceptance criteria during the demo to walk the user through, and I would follow basically the agenda of the show and tell portion would follow the acceptance criteria. Now, I will say that is the minority of teams that I've been on that have done it that way.
Yep.
It takes a little longer because sometimes the developer doesn't want to pull up whatever your ALM tool is and then flip over to their console or flip over to some test environment or some jump host or whatever it is, right? It might be a pain to flip environments, or sometimes I will show the work item in the work item system or whatever, and then I'll hand screen share over to the other. like again, like now the demo's getting a little hokier because now we're handing off and there's transitions and all kind. It takes a little longer. However, nobody's lost in that type of, I will say.
Yeah, I concur with that. Yeah, I really don't know how much longer it takes. The person showing is have a separate tab to open the story, right?
That'd be better.
And show that, and then flip out the other tab and say this is the actual demo. I agree with what you just said. I think at the end of the showing piece, because now that you've shown the acceptance criteria is met, right? Remember what's in the story, though, right? Ideally, it's the persona,
right?
And they're present in the room,
right?
So the developer could ask the question, does this meet your expectation? And if you're getting those kinds of responses like, yeah, it's fine, right? Then again, the facilitator kicks in and starts probing a little further. Like we said earlier, right? What would you change about it?
Yeah.
You don't want to go too far on a single story, but you want to make sure that they're happy, right, with what they're seeing. The other thing to do is, a lot of times a persona isn't a single person. It's usually a class of people. So ask the others in the same class that are in the room, right?
Yeah.
So there's many ways to do this.
And then we got on this tangent because we were talking about actually recording the feedback, which got me thinking we normally gripe on all of the remote facilitation tools and stuff like that. It'd be nice to have like a demonstration, presentation, whatever, picture-in-picture would be nice, where you could put up, here's one person's screen, but then here's another person's writing in a document notes or something on the side. I say writing in a document notes, but what I really mean is like if you use Jira or whatever, like they actively have a Jira work item open and are creating the items that you're talking about so that it's 100% clear what feedback is being taken by the one individual person recording notes, because then everybody can see it and be like, oh, no, we don't, that's not what I mean. What I mean is XYZ.
I like the visibility part of that. What I've tried is ask the team to see how they want to do this, and a BA volunteer, because they're the ones that wrote the story initially, perhaps, or augmented it, and they opened up a wiki page, gave it a title, the demo date, and they start making notes. And literally, it's just free form, bulleted set of notes.
Right.
User story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then just write down the feedback, bullet 1, bullet 2, etc. Then the next day, we would actually, as a team, revisit those. But I do like the idea of there and then concurrently for everyone to see that. Yeah. I just think there's trade-offs between them seeing that and losing focus between the demo and the notes.
Maybe. I mean, you could also open a Google Doc and have everyone contribute to it at the same time. That would be fine. And then they can keep it on their screen.
Yeah, there's ways to do that. I like that. I like the fact that everyone can see what we're recording, which is quite powerful.
Yeah, that's interesting because that is something I have not seen on a regular basis. I mean, I capture feedback, but I guess the more hard-nosed type of product owner would be like, it basically is my job to follow back with the customer on each specific piece of feedback and track it down, run it down, track it down. So we don't really need to put a lot of effort into it. Yeah. But I understand why they would say that. However, what's the harm in the Scrum Master who basically is doing nothing while this is happening? Maybe watching out for time boxes and maybe introing people as they start talking, but basically don't necessarily have an active hands-on role. There's no reason they can't open a Google Doc and just start typing the stuff they're hearing.
Anyone can do that.
Yeah,
that's the point, right? It could be a Scrum Master, it could be a QA person. Anyone.
It could be anyone.
Anybody.
Yeah.
But the point is, it should be done, right? Yeah. And we don't, to your point, we don't see that very often.
Well, I don't know why I'm anchoring on this, but to take it to the next level, if they are creating a document like that and eliciting feedback and people see that they're typing like, hey, type this, not that. Hey, make sure you phrase it this way because then I'll remember whatever. Then they can schedule a follow-on after the sprint review is over to make sure that we've run down or followed up on or tracked each of the items in the document. Yikes. They can make sure that we've tracked down each item in the document to make sure that nothing's getting lost or slipping between the cracks. And by doing that, they're helping the product person and the team move forward.
Yeah, I agree. Fully agree. There could be follow-ups. All of that starts with actually recording, right? So yeah. I'm going to actually put some of this in practice.
This is all added value.
It is,
because, like I said, I have tried to bring up and show the acceptance criteria and walk through them before we demo stuff.
Yeah.
However, I don't think I've ever had to tried to do like here's the Google Doc where I'm recording. I might start doing this in my sprint reviews. Like when we start the meeting, I'll put in the notes, show notes. I'll put in the notes a Google Doc link, and I'll be like, hey, this is a Google Doc. If you go in there, you can see what I'm typing, and feel free to either add to the notes in the meeting or to just shout out in the meeting, hey, change this, do this, change whatever, and you guys will see. You guys will see. Y'all will see.
Y'all's better, or you folks.
Y'all will see all the notes. The nice thing about using a Google Doc is they'll always be able to see the Google Doc as long as I don't delete the Google Doc or take their permission away. So as far as maybe a user who doesn't come to sprint reviews on a regular basis, maybe they only get invited here or there or whatever, for that sprint review, they can go see that their items are moving forward.
Sure, absolutely.
That's an interesting one.
That is one I want to put in practice. I mean, we do record right now, but it's just one person doing it. It's not visible to others. So I think there's value in that.
Let me cut back to the agenda here. So we kind of jammed the demo and feedback all together. In the model I use now, I'm doing a what, so what, then what type of agenda, and basically everything that he has in this agenda, I sort of use in my agenda. I don't call it out to this level of granularity, so I think this is a bit more helpful than what I do, because what I do is good for me, but I also race through a bunch of this other stuff, right? Yeah. But I definitely, his next category is release progress, which is number 1, discuss overall progress of the upcoming release, and number 2 is a confidence vote, 5 for the upcoming release. And he goes in the next section, he goes into his closing out the session, date for the next sprint review, sprint goal for the next sprint, if you know it already, or what you're shooting for or whatever. My last category of what next or then what is more aligned with what are the things that are at the top of the backlog that I think might end up in the next sprint. It's less of like my teams all do trunk-based development, so everything goes to production in the same sprint, so that I don't deal with releases per se of like holding things until they all go together. I don't deal with that, so this is less useful to me. Discussing overall progress towards a release is less useful to me. But if you want to talk about, but if I'm going to rename what he has here slightly to say, discuss the overall progress of what's coming out of the sprint in terms of the entire feature that it's planned against, then yes, I will do that. But also that is in line with what I also will do in the sprint review, which is to say, these are the next things the team are about to work on. These are the next things in the roadmap, the highest business priorities.
Yeah, he's bundling that part into the close phase.
He kind of is, yeah. The sprint goal for the next sprint, if you know it, yeah. So it's more of like the draft sprint goal for the, because I mean you don't really know the sprint goal until you close the sprint and then you go into the sprint planning for the next sprint. And even if the day you do your review, like we do our reviews right at the start of the day, after the sprint is closed. So the sprint at night, you get done, it's finished, and in the morning, I'll close the sprint, and I'll start a new one, which our sprint planning won't happen until after the review. But basically, the sprint has been closed. There are no active sprints right now. We'll do the review, and then we'll go right into sprint planning. After a retro, we'll go into right into sprint planning.
That's exactly the pattern I follow, mainly because I have offshore team members on several teams. So for them to participate, it has to be in the morning.
Yeah, right.
I do want to say that the sprint goal for the next sprint, it may not be even phrased that way, that it's a sprint goal. It's like coming next, right? Coming next, so it's aspirational. Right. Yeah. And everybody should know that it's subject to change, but high level, this is what's coming next.
So I change the agenda here a little bit for me because of release progress, again, because I'm doing trunk-based development, it goes straight out to production. I don't do a fist to 5 because the stuff that I'm demoing is already in production. So I don't do this. I kind of just want to skip the category for brevity, but I was going to say I'm trying to think of places where you would do this. Like if you're doing like mobile releases to the App Store, like there is a waiting period in the App Store development. But I kind of smash release progress and your closing. I kind of smash these categories together to say like the date of the next sprint review should like it should be 2 weeks. It should be recurring.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't have to.
From today.
But these users may or may not be in the next review. But the data next review, I have no problem with that. Hey, we do reviews every 2 weeks on Wednesday. The review should basically be at the same time.
Should be on the calendar.
Yeah, it should be on the calendar at the same time. Sprint goal for the next sprint, I'm going to reinterpret that to say, here's what's at the top of the backlog, what we're targeting for next sprint. My goal is going to come out of that. Or maybe if you generally know what you're going to go into the goal negotiating, that's fine. But I would rather just present the top of the backlog and just show the top of the backlog. Be like, hey, these are the things that we're kind of aiming for next sprint. I can't tell you exactly what the goal is because we got to make sure we can do it. But these are the things we're aiming for. An open-ended draft sprint goal.
And typically the product owner would do that. Number 2, the next.
Yeah, what's coming next? That's basically the whole category for me. What's coming next?
Yeah, I agree.
And then back to the credit category. So we're down here in the closing where here's the date for the next sprint review. Here's what's up next. And then he closes saying, thank you for everyone for coming. I think, thank you everyone for coming. I think that's where you should insert this credits section. I think it should be inserted near the end. Hey, we this is what's next in the sprint. But before we wrap, I want to give shout outs. And
that's how I do it at the end, because you can say people want to see, right? So they want to see this. They want to see the product increment.
Right.
And oftentimes I find stakeholders leave after they see what they came to see. And so they may or may not be around for the kudos part, but yeah, I just typically do it at the end.
I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing it at the end of each particular demo. Like we said, the demos and the feedback are together. Like it could be a demo, it could be a walkthrough of the work that you're about to demo, which basically goes back to what I was saying with the acceptance criteria, showing the story, demoing the actual feature, collecting the feedback, recording the feedback and agreeing on it. That's kind of where we went with the documentation. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of that, you do your kudos on the feature, and then you move on to the next feature. And basically this little demo feedback thanks cycle repeats over and over and over again until you're done with everything. And then when you're done with everything, you do your what's next. Mm-hmm. You start to close the event. You do what's next. You talk about your next sprint goal that you have that you expect as planned. And you thank everyone for coming. And you do any general thanks that need to go around at the end again. So you basically there's 2 built-in parts in the agenda to give thanks, which is that's kind of neat.
I like that. I think that's a good wrap.
Before we end, shout out to Vibhor Chandel. Before we end, let's try to summarize the template, and I'll summarize the template on the screen, maybe in a Word document, or maybe I'll put a post up on the LinkedIn page. So I think our version was intro. The only thing we ended up doing with the intro is intro only if necessary. Yeah,
only for new folks, or only if necessary, and quick. Like we said, no more than 5, but that's...
So we did the intro only if necessary. We kept this whole sprint goal section. I think we skipped most of outcome.
We did. I think we said if there's really appetite, then we can say the efforts applied and the output. Discoveries made and strategy used should be bundled in with the demo, we said.
Right. We move credits to the end.
Yep.
And then we combined demo
and feedback.
But we kept the walkthrough of the work done. We're basically interpreting that as introducing the feature and basically walking through the whole story, acceptance criteria, or whatever. Could be multiples if it's all being demoed together. And then we're actually doing the demo. We're stopping to collect feedback, ask questions, and then we're recording the feedback and showing that. Inside of the demo, the feedback, we also added time for credits and shout-outs inside of that. And then we moved on to smashing release progress and closing together, where we talked about the upcoming work, upcoming roadmap, upcoming stories, upcoming sprint goals, if you generally know the draft version of the sprint goals. And we left another piece in here for gratitude and thanking everyone and giving shout-outs.
So we'd only have like 4 sections in total.
Yeah. Discoveries made was in the demo section. Okay, I gotta add that. And then the accepting failures of team should be up here in the sprint goal. It should be part of this discussion.
It should be.
We didn't mention that specifically, but I'll put it in our agenda. And we ended up with 4 sections: intro, sprint goal, demo and feedback, and then the conclusion, closing. Yeah. Okay.
So try out those things and let us know how it goes for you, right?
Yeah. And the nice thing is, I think once I have this down as an agenda, I'll start using it myself.
I'm going to start using some of those points myself.